My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Safety looks very different in different environments. We've talked to a few guests who are most familiar with remote resource extraction sites, some in construction, and today we'll be speaking with a guest who has extensive experience in the retail environment. Mark Gobert is a retired safety manager who cut his teeth in insurance and then worked in retail safety for nearly 30 years. He worked in risk control for Macy's and retired as director of safety for Sonoma. His accomplishments include massive injury expense reductions, developing the first written safety program for Macy's, and crafting his own theory of safety practice, which we'll discuss today. Much of his work involved developing relationships with workers and executives to meet business needs and keep everyone safe. Today, he'll share his views on the safety industry, explaining injury expenses, and showing recognition, among other topics. Mark joins us from the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on.
So let's look at your career as a whole to start. Over your time working in safety, how do you feel the practice and understanding of safety has changed over the years?
I think bottom line, what I used to see and what I heard, and part of my education was at first people just thought, well, it's just the cost of doing business. These expenses, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think the more savvy individuals knew this, but I found that I often had to explain this to the individuals, and the proverbial, the light went on, was really what I tried to work on. And it's not just the cost of doing business. Is there expense? Yes. But there's a lot that they could do through engagement, very much engagement, but also through practices, communication to affect that. And then the other side or ancillary benefit was the morale factor, which gets into productivity, everything else. So that was where I saw it more of. I think that's an important factor. And I think any good risk person has got to find a way to bring the communication in some form or fashion so that the individuals you're working with and the decision makers have to understand or gain conceptual knowledge of the impact of safety, not in just direct costs, but also indirect costs.
There's an ongoing debate often on this show about different approaches to safety and organizational culture. So some people have developed principles that guide their practice. Some focus on understanding the nature of work. Some are more interested in context and how the organization functions. And some also feel that there's nothing new under the sun. Do you feel like newer safety ideas are just recycled older ideas, or are they truly shifting the safety conversation?
Good question. I think some are recycled. I think what I've learned the most in this part is that safety is a basic process, but there are new ideas. But I think this is what I learned time and time again. The associates or the employees know the answers to what it is, but seldom are they asked. And I had so many different examples. One of them, when I worked for Macy's, was we had all these employees filing reports for injuries to their neck. And I said, well, what's going on here? So I met with them. And they basically said, and they used a proverbial, they got so angry, they started using inappropriate words. And I said, okay, I get it. Let's keep on focus here. And it was the apron they were given. No one asked them. And so I took their ideas. I had it redesigned to what they wanted. And we put it out to every store in Macy's, and the injury factors went down a lot. So I think it's, again, making contact with your associates. Now, there are times that I will hear that the employees, well, they're just bad. They just complain about everything. And there are those factors in there. But most of the time, the employees just want to be engaged and to listen to them. And they have the answers 90% of the time. So I think that's the big factor there.
So you started here, but tell me a little bit about practicing safety in retail. Like what do you think sets retail apart from industries like manufacturing or construction in terms of safety?
I think in terms of that, people in retail work hard. They're working fast. They have multiple tasks to do. And I say that because I had worked in insurance before for Transamerica, and I saw all sorts of environments. But the people in retail multitask, have odd hours, and then when there's a visit or something, they put in longer hours. And they often work in situations where there isn't the equipment that they need to do, such as material handling equipment, or the equipment is broken. So it is a physical job for almost all of the people, regardless if they're sales or in support or almost any position. So I think that's the difference there. I'll close it on that part. Often they will work 10, 12, 13 hours in a day. And imagine what it's like during the holiday season. They even have that. And in the other part is that they have direct contact with the customer. So the customer can be rude or very complimentary, but that's just an added pressure that I don't think many people think of.
Yeah, I would imagine, in construction, you drop something on your toe. Hopefully you're wearing steel-toed boots, but you hurt yourself and you can let out an expression that you might not be able to do if you're standing in front of, standing in the middle of Macy's.
Correct.
One of your approaches is about engaging management and associates in safety. So can you explain what you mean by that? And are there different approaches for those two kind of groups of people?
Yeah. For the management team, let's hit that one first. One of the things I learned, and I found so few safety people do this, is how do you explain the cost of injuries? Why should they care? They've got 13, 15, 12 items on their list. And often safety isn't it. And that's where I got into the topic of, well, it's just the cost of doing business. So they are the decision makers, and especially above them. So what I tried to do, and I met with finance people, and what I was able to do was to say, okay, we had this employee injury. It resulted in medical treatment. What is your operating margin? And then we set a cost allocation program, which I can talk about more if you wish. But how much did that cost you in number of items having to be sold? How many days of sales? How did that lower your profit margin? Did you meet your goal for your operating margin and the sales? And an example would be easy as I would say, okay, you had these many medically treated injuries, and there's a formula in there, but it would be easy for me to say, okay, that took 45.2 days of your sales. Or for one region, I showed that the money they saved on their injuries from the year before worked out to 21 extra days of sales in a year. And so there, boom, you have them. I mean, at least if they don't get that, then there's a problem. So that was the management piece. But I never tried to come in rough or that I'm better than you. I think some people that I've seen in my career, especially the early days, were like, well, I'm the safety person. I'm the most important person there is. Well, that's a turnoff right off from the beginning. So try to be consultative. And then if I could do that, and I could get their attention, which eventually it did work out that way, because when I related that message to the people above them, they supported it. So then I would meet or determine through accident investigation reports or just meeting with the employees, how do I make it better for you? And that was the approach I took. I mean, sometimes it was simple as like, let's turn on the lights 10 minutes before you get into the store so you're not tripping as you're walking into the building. And to the employees, boy, was that a win. And then there are other factors that I did in the form of recognition too, which I can talk about now or later.
Yeah, I have a question about that a little bit later. So, but you kind of talked a little bit about my next question, which was opinions about how to explain the expense of injuries so that people understand. So in this case, I think you're talking executives. And I think it's fair to say that most executives, they don't want people injured, but it's not like, and it's not like they don't care if people are injured, but do you think that it's just hard for them to wrap, like if you approach them with, there were this many injuries, is it hard for them to wrap their heads around that as opposed to, okay, let's look at this in numbers? Is that like in terms of costs or?
Yeah, I found that in all my experiences through all my my different occupations as I work, was that no one has ever really brought this forward to them. This is an education piece. I mean, they were told, an example was, well, you have to open up so many credit cards to make your goal. And I would show them that, well, it takes 210 credit card applications to pay for one customer injury. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't understand that. So I think the finance piece, because not only can you do it in that sense, but when you can show the people at top, which often have never, ever been brought into the conversation of the expense of injuries. And then when you show them that, well, you could have increased your profit margin by 11% last year had you only had a 50% reduction. Those are kind of the concepts. So you could have that argument for the people on top or the decision makers, the vice presidents, whatever. But you also, to the employees, they care. Most care. There's always the exception, but most care. And, and then to bring that further, you do the recognition for the successful teams. And in that sense, whatever it takes. So we would have this award called the No Lost Time Injury Award, which rewarded bringing people back to work. And then the money would go to the location and we would sponsor a party that would be directed to the employees, not just to enhance that store manager's bottom line, because that's when you can alienate them, alienate this. What's their buy-in? Who cares about me? And I really think you have to focus so much on bringing it to the employees. And when you explain the cost, they like, oh my God, I had no idea. So, and what do you need? So that seemed to have worked pretty well. I mean, an example is when I worked for Williams Sonoma, we were able to bring our employee injury expense, because we were based on a cost allocation program, but we were able to reduce our expense in 7 to 8 years from 15.1 million to 3.4 million annually. And that's when you can cite that, boy, you have instant credibility, because I think you stagger people. Even people in finance didn't even think of this. So that's kind of how you bring it around. I just want to make certain that I clarify. To me, it's not about the money, but it gives you the basis and also the validity, I guess is the word I would use, for what you're doing.
Well, yeah, it helps translate something that's a little bit abstract into the language of people that you're talking to. Now, a minute ago, and I think you said this by accident, you said customers, I think, instead of workers. But that brings me to a question. What are are you responsible for the safety of customers? You must be in some sense. How does that work?
Oh, that's huge. That's absolutely huge because making a safer environment, and a big measure of that is floor conditions. What are your floor conditions like? Are you making unsafe conditions, things falling onto customers? Because not only that's a direct expense, obviously. And the problem with a general liability claim is you never know when it's going to end. It could go on for years. And a real severe case could be well into the hundred thousands. Well, someone has to pay for that. So I would often try to explain what is called the four elements of tort law. I mean, people in retail have a lot of things going on, but if you can explain the four elements of tort law for basic, like the visual teams, which would set up displays, which had never been explained this before, duty owed, you breach that duty by causing a bad condition. You have injury or harm, either usually it was bodily injury, but every once in a while there were the other ones. And then the proximate cause. This was like, okay, this was the concept that I tried to bring forward, because not only does it reduce the expense, no one wants to go into a location and get hurt because the floor is wet or that thing fell on my head, because that's when it goes to social media too. I went into them, they didn't pay attention to me, I got hurt, and I haven't heard from them. So those were the big things. And once in a while, someone that was a customer would figure out where I was and called me directly. And I'm like, how did you find me? And they said, well, I'm a lawyer and I know how to do these things, and you should be aware of these factors. And I got to give them credit. I mean, if they're that diligent about finding me, they're going to be even more diligent about restitution here. So that's huge. And I think the other part to it, I could sell it in not only, but also visual merchandising standards, in the sense, don't you want a nice looking store for your customers instead of the one that has all the stuff on the floor? And that wasn't a hard sell either when you bring those factors in. But I want to make certain that I clarify here, I always tried to be accessible. I tried never to be full of myself or anything like that. I think being accessible and listening. You have to listen. You can't cut the people off or think you already know it all, because you don't know it all. And the moment you have a bad approach is when you shut people down.
Okay, well, I have more questions for you, but first I have a message from the company behind the podcast. In busy warehouse settings, safety competes for workers' attention with speed and productivity. Teams need cutting tools that perform consistently, stay clean, and last through shift after shift. Traditional box cutters can rust or dull, adding laceration risks and productivity slowdowns. The slice box cutter is designed to lower risk holistically with an award-winning ergonomic design, which I'll show you this way. Blades that never rust, and a unique finger-friendly blade that is safe to the touch. You don't have to compromise performance for safety either. Slice blades last up to 11 times longer than traditional metal blades. Because they're chemically inert, they're easy to clean, and changing the blades is quick and easy with no extra tools required, so workers can minimize downtime. The slice box cutter's distinctive, ergonomically curved handle protects users' hands from staples and debris and reduces the risk of repetitive strain injury. Available in manual retract or auto retractable handles, you can offer workers flexibility without compromising their safety. Here's what one Slice customer had to say. Bought these for our employees to use instead of regular metal blade utility knives. Thought I would have to take the other knives away to get them to use them, but once they found out how much easier they open boxes, now it's the only box cutter they use. Slice makes people and places safer, and Slice is owned by Safety Products Global, who offers the largest range of safety knives on the market. Want to learn more about which tools will work for your materials? To request free samples, go to safetylabspodcast.com/samples. And now back to our interview. You had said that you feel it's important to work with people to get them there with safety, and the emphasis is on with. You talked a little bit about it, but can you describe more what you mean by that?
Well, I think a perfect segue for this is the relationship I had with Slice. And I want to bring this up. My contact, Matt, was absolutely terrific. So when I started with Williams Sonoma, they basically didn't have a safety program, at least on the store side. And while I had warehousing towards the end of my career with them, most of my time was the stores and corporate offices. But what I found is that they had no program, and the box openers were horrid, which they were using. They used just the razor blade types. So I worked with Pacific Handy Cutters at the time, or Slice, and I said, well, let's try this. And Matt's approach was great. He gave me a lot of different products to try, and we used those, and I distributed them, but I asked the employees, which ones do you want? What works best? How does this happen? And so because of that, um, you guys are the suppliers for all of Williams Sonoma Incorporated. And I think that's terrific because our injuries went down, the severity. I mean, you can have a real severe injury with a bad box, or with any box cutter, of course. But we also developed a safety video, which we showed how to use. We made a separate training with the assistance of Matt to introduce the box openers in the correct manner. And what I liked about this and using there was a multitude. And one thing I learned, that not one fits all, but you have plenty of them. But the other thing that I gained a lot of credibility with to the teams was that it isn't just right-handed, it's left-handed. Oh, you need a left-handed one? There's a left-handed one. So we had that, and then we just put them on the supply list, and I-86, or lack of better words, got rid of. The old box openers, or I had them. Now, that isn't easy to do, and I know there were some hanging around, but this made the difference. And at first I got the argument, well, these cost more. Not much more, but they're looking at bulk and multiple. But when I showed the reduction in injuries, but also the associates' comments, because I would pan the people and I say, get back to me. And then they would, and I would produce their comments. So it was field tested. So it made a big difference to them. Again, it's about listening to the employees, but the box openers were huge, and it was a win to all the employees, I think. So I think that was a big one there. So that's hope I answered your question in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, field testing, right? That's a way to work with, rather than just, okay, here's your new box cutter. Everyone uses it, and have a good day.
Right. And I think there's a point of, the individuals that are just trying to get the job done. Okay, this is what I saw. And they just order them. And that was part of it. The other part about engagement, which I probably didn't bring up, is instant rewards. So one of the things is, okay, tell me where your exit is. These are little Band-Aid holders, and they're refillable. Well, I had red, blue, but in those regards, they could take them home and they say, oh my gosh, I have grandchildren, I have children. This will work out really good. So instead of just here's your ballpoint pen.
So one of the things you mentioned before and that I wanted to ask was about incentives. So what's your view on incentives Do you think they work? And do you think that there are some that work better than others?
I do think incentives work, but it should not be an incentive that limits the, I don't want to put it, that limits the potential of someone reporting an injury. And there's always that downside. And I've heard the arguments, and I think that's the case. So incentives in a situation that rewards good behavior, be it through observations. But the one thing about observations, they take time. And sometimes people don't want to put in that time. But there are incentives in that regard. So one of the things that I worked with was I made a safety binder because that's how I felt, at least in the retail world. A binder that's in paper, but one of them was circle the hazard contest. So they would have a page, they would circle the hazards, and that crossed language barriers too. So everybody could just be involved, because spelling safety backwards on a crossword puzzle, I don't know how that does anything. It does, to me it doesn't, but I'm sure just someone else might argue that point. But in the incentives that they can feel that they can report an unsafe practice or an unsafe condition without providing fodder for this disheartened employee. But in that regard, yes, I do think incentives that are easy to do, be it report a hazard, have a form, or reward good behavior. That's the big one, and that's where we go.
So do you think, and you kind of alluded to this, that there's ever a danger of like if the incentive is for reporting, people like over reporting, or if the incentive is for lost time, like reducing lost time or reducing injuries, that people might underreport? Like what's your view on that?
I'm not a proponent of days without an injury. Posting that on the board, I know that shows, and I've seen it a lot, just because that almost discourages. It can, in the right situation or the wrong situation, maybe result in employees not reporting their injuries. So I'm not a proponent of that. In the terms of lost time, though, there are the injuries, and I found this to be huge, because a medically treated injury versus a lost time injury, when you get into indemnity payments, medical payments, rehab, everything else, is so expensive. But what I found time and time again was that so many situations, the line manager or the department manager had no idea that there was a difference. So what are some of the light duty work performances that you can provide? Now, it has to be sanctioned by a medical facility, obviously, not just, well, I'm going to bring him back or her back because, well, I don't want them to miss time. But when you can provide that, and with them being at work, that was huge, because you don't cause the morale problems. Because let's say that you have 5 people that are supposed to work, but 2 of them are out. Well, then that just causes more problems. So I think in the incentive part, such as you recognize Safety Idea of the Month, that was one the incentive I would push. I say, well, ask people what their ideas are. Now, I caution this, because don't read it out loud. Screen them before you announce them, because you never know, there might be the austere one out there. But recognizing this and then implementing it is a great idea. Again, it's about listening to your associates. And there were some examples where I felt that bringing safety forward and engaging the employees lessened the potential for, and I'm not against unions, my dad was in a union, but for unionization, especially in retail environments. So I think that was it, because they're happy employees. They felt that they were being valued.
I'm going to zoom way out now and ask, how do you feel about the future of occupational safety in the next, I don't know, 10 to 20 years?
I feel positive about it. I do. I do. I think that there's more. The biggest difference to what I see today and last year versus 30, 35 years ago was the introduction and the thought concept about the word engagement. That was rarely ever brought up when I first started. And I had an example at a plant that made plastic red caps that go on milk jugs. And I was asked to go out there. This was in Tennessee. And I was marked, you better perform here. You better get this done. And I drove up to up there. I'm like, oh my God. And what I found was there was no communication between the two. So, and I'm talking the management and the employees. So I called a meeting a half hour before the end of the shift, and there were the 8 managers about 10 feet away from me. There were the employees that were another 10 feet away, and I'm in the middle engaging this. And it was very evident. And that was when I really learned the importance of engagement. So I think engagement, employee recognition, I see that much more. And I think any employer or manager that's not thinking about this, or at least accepting the concept, is making a mistake. That's what I feel.
So, at the start of our chat, I asked you about how you felt about how the safety industry had changed over the course of your career. And I want to ask the same question, but turn it around and ask how you feel you have changed and what you've learned when it comes to occupational safety.
I really loved what I did. I think that, and everybody said I had passion. Maybe not everybody, but a good percentage of people said passion for what I did. I think it made me, well, when you like what you do, you're excited about it. It's not really work for you. So for me, it made me a better listener. Definitely. That's one of the things I had to learn. And I hope I learned it. I think I did, is listen to what works. But also, it improved my negotiation skills, because I learned there's 2 sides here. There's their side, and maybe there's more than that. Maybe there's the insurance company, but it's about how you dress. I mean, I think that makes a big difference. I mean, how you look and how you respond. And in that regard, I think, and sometimes delegating, but it's the biggest thing for me. It was the follow through. Okay, on the 15th, because someone told me once when I first started in safety, do say what you're going to do, but do what you say. So I think in that sense, it made me, I feel more fulfilled. I look back at my work career very positively, with a sense of accomplishment. And I think personally, innately, that makes me feel good.
If you had a magic wand or the power to do this, where would you focus training for the next generation of safety professionals?
We don't know what AI is going to do. I mean, it's in that whole, and I know there's a lot of questions. Where is it really taking us, though? But it's whatever media, and I don't think just, okay, listen to this computer program. I still think that the one-on-one touch, be it who the manager is, he, she, whatever the situation is, but that they don't just go to computer-based trainings, CBT. There is those benefits, but there's nothing like interaction, because the interaction brings the instant answers versus, well, I watched the computer program or whatever it is, but if it doesn't allow feedback, then I think that makes a mistake. And I think feedback is huge. But also in that part, while I'm not certain you need to bring it to the employees, what is the percentage of your sales or your operating margin that is going to the expense for your injuries or your safety program. I think in safety, there's going to be an expense with it, but I do think it's a controllable expense and what works for you. So I think that's kind of my approach on that one.
I want to harken back a minute because I just remembered something you said earlier. I'm curious about how you deal with, and this will be true for safety managers in most of the world, many parts of the world where there's been lots of immigration, there's lots of different cultures and different languages, people speaking different languages. So there are often language barriers in a workplace. I would think quite a few in like warehousing and retail. So is there anything that you did differently to approach that, or?
Well, the language barrier, especially like because I'm based out of Northern California, and Spanish is obviously the dominant language. But given that part, it doesn't matter. I go up to Portland, and there was a lot of Asian-based languages up there too. So one of the ways I would go these places, I was like, oh my gosh, I have this. Finding some way that you could have that communicated through a lead or translated in a sense, because you also have to meet your OSHA standards too. And how do you get that through? But a lot of people cannot speak multiple languages or more than one. So trying to find a communicator in some form to meet the language, be it a site person, a manager, but being there with them so that, it's like, okay, here's your script. Bye. Let you do this. But being there with them so that if they had questions, you could relate. So again, so that they feel engaged. But that is a huge because one place I went to had 8 different languages, and that was their primary language. So that's a tough challenge at times. But taking the time, but explaining to the management that you're going to be doing this so they're not saying, well, you just cut off my productivity. So what day works best for you? What time is the best time to be there? Again, it's trying to work so you reach acceptance. And that's where I think that was the big piece there. Good question, though.
Yeah. So was there a lot of travel then to different sites throughout? I guess it'd be throughout the US. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for Williams Sonoma, I was their safety person, sole person for over 7 years. So did that involve a lot of travel? Yes. And the one part I didn't touch on, and I haven't touched on, and I'm sorry I haven't, is the OSHA exposure. Because, the unhappy employees are often the first ones to call OSHA because they feel their answers aren't being addressed. So what I did was I tried to elevate the safety at the stores and the corporate offices. But we went 4 years, and Williams Sonoma is an S&P 500 company without an OSHA fine, not one OSHA fine over 4-year period. So that was huge there. But again, and I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, that is another factor that is often brought in there because I think most people at OSHA are pretty good. I like OSHA as an agency. I really do. There's always the exception, but then there's always the exception to everything. But there it is there. But it was about the individuals who feel they aren't being touched, and that's often by a language barrier. They're the ones that feel disenfranchised, I guess is the word to use. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but there's that part too. So how do you get the message to, but you also ought to know what the percentage of the non-English speaking individuals are before you take that task on.
Okay, now I'm jumping around a bit here, but if you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, is there a piece of advice that you would give yourself?
I'm going to get back to do what you say, and say what you're going to do and do what you say. I mean, it's all about credibility. And if they're relying on you to do this and you don't follow through, well, you've just lost your credibility. Well, don't bother with him or her because they don't do what they're going to say they're going to do. I do think, though, there is the point of having a manageable workload too, where, yeah, sometimes just say, I can't do it next Tuesday. I have other things going on, so that you're communicating back. But I do feel that follow through communication for the reputation of whoever's running your safety department, and also reaching out. There's other people who have the answers, and not everything's based on a computer or looking up on a web search. Oh, it's a lot better. I mean, now that you can look it up and find the answer versus the old days with you had to go down to OSHA or you had to have the books. Well, yeah, it's a lot easier now. So that strips away some of the excuses as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, how can our listeners learn more about any of the topics in our discussion today? Like, are there any books or websites or organizations that you found helpful that you think people might find helpful?
I've read some theory book. I think the one thing on the workplace violence, which is huge. I mean, it's a terrible situation, but hitting the different sites, and it's nice because you can just type in to Google whatever program you use to find the answers. But I think joining chat groups, organizations, not only gives you validity, but it also gives you outside perspective with that. I think those are the big ones there. I don't think you need to belong to every organization that ever existed with safety, because I do think that takes away balance on your own personal life. But I will say that if anybody has a question or wants to reach out to me, they can reach out in LinkedIn. I am retired from Williams Sonoma, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if there's any questions or thoughts. Or I have done done some international. I've been a speaker at a couple international conferences, which was really interesting because you're bringing around different ideas, and it was really fascinating. But anyway, if it has any questions, they can reach out to me.
Okay, well, that is today's show. Thank you, Mark, for joining me.
Thank you. It was fun, and I appreciate being asked to do this.
Thanks to our listeners, and of course to our writing, production, and tech team. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.